Apple is the only company that's updating its cameras in the correct way. But to understand why Apple is doing this, you have to understand some of the basics and some of the more complex aspects of photography. My name is Mitchell. I'm fluent in tech, so you don't need to be. Let's go ahead and connect on Instagram and Twitter. Links down below. A little bit of background about myself. I first started into the world of photography at age 12. I'm 31 right now. I started when I had to load film. At the age of 15, I was using Adobe Lightroom and digital cameras, and now I have my YouTube channel. I'm a video editor as well as a photographer, and I do advertising and marketing photo shoots for my own personal brand and company that I have on Amazon, as well as doing portraits for friends and family. With all of that out of the way, I have a pretty good handle on digital imaging, mobile technology, and what Apple is doing. It's time to get nerdy. Nerd alert! And jump into the world of mobile photography. Now, Apple has chosen to use 12 megapixel sensors from the beginning with their iPhones, and they've continued to use 12 megapixel sensors with their iPhone for a very specific reason, and that's been documented. Because 4K video is approximately 8 megapixels, and the sensor for all mobile cameras is a 3:4 aspect ratio. When you cut off the top and bottom, you're left with about 8 megapixels, or roughly 4K. That's why hybrid still video cameras like the Sony a7S Mark III are 12 megapixels, because they can record the entire sensor and every single megapixel on that sensor, crop off the top and bottom, and they're left with their 4K image. And there's very specific advantages to having the minimum number of pixels necessary to record 4K. Now, to understand that, we need to go ahead and understand what a sensor is. And a sensor is a piece of technology that is used to go ahead and read the energy, because light is energy, and then decode that light into red, yellow, or red, green, and blue. Now, each pixel is going to have 4 specific sensors for each color. These are called photosites. And on top of each of these photosites, there's 4 photosites together, because red is the weakest signal. I might be screwing that up, but 2 of the colors are the same. There's 1 lens for each photosite. It magnifies the light, and then goes and divides that light into the 3 colors, or RGB. Having a larger sensor means that the actual lens in front of each pixel that magnifies that light is a bigger lens. Now, as we're going to talk about in a moment, the bigger the lens that you have, the more you can magnify that signal, and being energy and light coming through the lens, and thus your sensor is more sensitive. So how does Apple, with its 12 megapixel sensors, continue to make their cameras better and more sensitive in low light? So how can Apple do this? Well, simply put, Apple can do this in 2 ways. And when Apple says that their cameras are 40% more sensitive to light, they're not lying, but this is what they're doing. Now, the first way that you can make your sensor more sensitive to light is you can physically make that sensor bigger. Increasing the surface area means that you're increasing the lens area for each photosite, meaning each pixel is bigger. The bigger the pixel, the more sensitive it can be. So increasing the sensor size by 20% doesn't necessarily correlate into 20% more light, but that's the first way where they can make sensors more more sensitive. Now, the second way that they can do this is by making the lens on their new cameras bigger. And this is primarily what Apple has done, and it's a lot of what they do in the iterative upgrades. So I want everyone to understand that the lens is measured in an f-stop, and an f-stop is simply a mathematical formula with the size of the opening for the lens in relation to the magnification, or the millimeters of the lens. And what this means is that you can very easily, very readily increase the amount of light going and hitting the sensor by making the lens that you have in front of that sensor have a larger opening. So really, when Apple says that they have increased the sensitivity to light by 30%, they've just given the lens in front of their sensor a larger f-stop, and that in and of itself increases the sensor's sensitivity. We're going to talk about why that approach is really important in just a moment. But back to talking about lenses and sensors. Now, it's really difficult for Apple to advertise that their new lens for their camera is a better lens. It's much easier if they just advertise it as letting in more light, 20% more light, 30% more light, 20% more sensitive. All of those things are true, because telling someone that it went from an f1.8 to an f1.6 doesn't mean very much. But telling someone that they got 25% more light lets them know that they can probably shoot in slightly darker conditions. Now, giving us a bigger aperture on our lens is really, really important. Remember how we talked about turning up the digital gain and having noise? Well, the faster and the brighter our lenses, the less we have to turn up that digital signal. And because of that, we're able to get a better, cleaner signal off of our sensor. What does that mean? Well, our sensors have certain characteristics like dynamic range, highlight roll-off, and a bunch of other things that maybe I'll save for another video, and if you want me to do that, let me know down below. But doing those things and allowing our sensors to digitally turn up that signal less, by and large, gives our sensors better performance. Now, Apple doing cameras on their phones better than anyone else comes down to one or two key features. The first one is that sensor technology doesn't get 30, 40, or 50% better every year. It just doesn't happen. Manufacturing doesn't allow for us to have these radically different design sensors. The research and development costs aren't really giving us the ability to get these kind of year-over-year improvements. So really, the amount better that a camera sensor is now versus a year ago or 2 years ago, it's not that big of a difference. Apple knows this, and that's why, by and large, Apple can get away with upgrading its camera sensors on its phones slower, but giving us better lenses every year as the circuit boards and other components inside the phones get smaller. Apple is able to give us bigger lenses and physically bigger sensors. And ultimately, having a bigger lens and bigger sensor means that you're going to get better camera performance. Apple just doesn't advertise that their lenses have a new f-stop. They just give it to you and tell you it's 20% more sensitive. Apple is aware of this, and that's how they're able to get increased performance year over year with an old sensor and a new lens. They already know the features and quirks of that sensor. Maybe it's got better highlight roll-off. Maybe it does a better job at recovering the shadows. Maybe there's more mid-tone noise in the image. Whatever those things may be, because each sensor does generally have characteristics with it, Apple can tune those aspects in the image signal pipeline and thus get better performance with slightly older hardware but newer updated lenses. And ultimately, I would love to see more Android manufacturers openly advertising that, hey, we're using a sensor from last year, but we're giving it a new lens, better stabilization, etc. Honestly, that was maybe the most disappointing thing about Xiaomi and the Xiaomi HMX camera setup, the one that came on the Mi Note 10 Pro, Xiaomi Mi 10 Pro, Xiaomi Mi 11, and maybe one other device that I'm forgetting. But Xiaomi could have, in fact, used that same camera sensor, given us f1.6, 1.5, 1.7 aperture lenses, and tuned more performance out of it. But ultimately, they haven't really done much of that, which is why the only upgrades that we're getting year over year are on the processing side of things. And honestly, when you use Gcam, the HMX sensor kind of just feels like the HMX sensor. My Mi 10 had nearly identical performance to the Mi Note 10 Pro, even though they were completely different chipsets. The lenses on them were the same with the same image stabilization. And ultimately, that's just the way digital imaging works. And if you guys enjoyed that kind of deep dive, a thumbs up and a subscribe would be massively appreciated. If you like me talking about photography and mobile imaging, let me know either on Twitter or on Instagram. Let's have a little back and forth conversation. Hit me up on Discord. Peace.